So welcome to the Rising Beyond podcast. I'm Sybil Cummin, and I really wanted to make sure that this podcast offers hope, right? There's so many horror stories. And so I really wanted to offer hope for people who have come from being a victim. They're able to move kind of through the process to a survivor, and then past that onto thriving in their world. And that it doesn't really matter where you come from and what experiences you've had throughout your life, that you can thrive in your world. And so in order to offer that hope, I have Lovern Gordon with me today because I know that she offers that to everyone that she comes into contact with. And so I'm going to share a little bit about Lovern. She is a 2-time Sur-thriver, which is her word, and I love it, of domestic violence. So she experienced domestic violence as a child in her home, and then in a 2-year relationship as an adult. And so after escaping that, she created the Love Life Now Foundation. And that is an organization that offers awareness, education. It supports survivors of abuse, and they also really help other domestic violence agencies with whatever they need. And then she's written her memoir, which is called The Legacy He Left Me. And it really shows her experience living through domestic violence as a child, kind of how she experienced as an adult, and then the after, and how she came out of that and started to thrive. So Lovern, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and I'm so excited that you're able to talk with our audience, because I think hope is something that we are a lot of times in short order of for domestic violence victims and survivors.
Yeah, for sure. And, oftentimes when we are in the midst of those situations, it doesn't look like there's any light at the end of the tunnel. We believe what our abusers have told us time and time again. We believe the experiences we've had leading up to this particular relationship is where it's at. And what led us to be what we believe is our destiny in those moments. But it's not until we decide that we are worth more, we've had enough, that we even begin to think about hope. So yeah, hope is very much attainable when it comes to the end of these relationships, and even sur-thriving, which is not my word. It's one that I adopted very sort of early on, even prior to the pandemic, that I really love. And it really combines the idea of being not just a survivor, but to be able to thrive at life. You're not just here surviving. You're not just going through the motions of, escaping and now living life. You are thriving at life. And I really take that seriously, to be able to do that. And I'm humble to be able to do it, but know the experiences that led me here are, not to be foreshadowed either.
Yeah, and it's a good segue, because I'd love to hear, you brought up kind of self-worth as a huge piece of this healing puzzle. And so as a child witness of domestic violence, how was that maybe affected by witnessing domestic violence in your home for years? How are you affected in that way?
Yeah, so, watching your mom be brutally abused by your father is not something for the faint of hearts, especially for a child. So from the very early times that I knew myself, some of my earliest memories are my father attacking our mother physically, emotionally, and verbally. And when the brutal, physical attacks came, it was because she would either flee or stay, because she couldn't flee. And, as a child, you're thinking, I'm helpless to be able to help her, because the perpetrator is your father, who is also very strict with you as a child. And he is the end all. He says what happens, he says what doesn't happen, and you feel stuck. And the other adults that are around you also doesn't seem like they can help, even when it came to authority.
Mm.
Police would sometimes show up, very rarely, but when they did, it was because he was able to talk his articulate way out of it. He was college educated, had a really awesome job, was the financial breadwinner in the family, and my mom was barely elementary school educated and depended on him solely and surely for everything.
Yeah.
So watching all of this, what my understanding of relationships was that the man does everything. The man says what's supposed to happen. The woman does what she's told. Um, and in our case, our family dynamic, the woman is weak. And,
Yeah.
you know, I almost sort of wanted to rebel against those ideas that were placed on me because I had, growing up in the Caribbean, which is where I'm from, Trinidad originally, the outside world that we had access to was through our TVs. And I
Yeah.
saw different dynamics from, shows like The Cosby Show and, Saved by the Bell and, all these other shows that sort of showed the structure where families were able to be loving and open and trusting and have conversations about things. And to add to that, my father, who was very strict, as I mentioned, he allowed me to go, outside of our home and spend times in different parts of where we lived, which was the ghetto. And
Uh-huh.
then being able to go to more affluent parts of the country where siblings live, not siblings, but other family members lived and spent time there. I also saw the different dynamic of family structure. And again, it pushed me even more to rebel against the idea that this is where it was at. It came to a point where at some point, I even resented my mother for staying. I didn't understand her reasons to stay. I didn't understand that regardless of why she stayed, there was no reason that a man should put their hands on the person that they say they loved. All I knew was that I wanted to be different. I wanted better for myself. Unfortunately, going through those years with those adamant feelings and that sense of sureness that, that would never be me. Children that grow up in abusive homes often tend to go on to become abusive themselves or fall prey as victims. And I
Yeah.
was no exception. Though I had this, outward, want to not be or end up like my mother, subconsciously, I was already taught and it was ingrained in me what was the end game of what relationships were going to look like. And
That
so
conditioning
that
of
conditioning
this
is
is what
really
relationships
tough.
are.
Yeah, it's really tough. I often say parents are our first indicators. Parents' relationships are our first indicators of what our adult relationships are going to look like, or even our teenage relationships, because that's oftentimes where the cycle begins to repeat.
Mhm.
And, again, for me, it was absolutely no different. Even though I told myself many times, my subconscious remembered and knew sort of only what I knew. I could only go off of what I knew.
Yeah. And there's that, right? As we develop, a lot of what our self-worth is based on is other people, like the people that are around us. And so if just, identifying as a woman and a female, and you hear the worthlessness of a female within the relationship, it's really easy to be conditioned that I don't have the same amount of worth as a man, and to carry that through into your next relationship.
Yes, yes, which oftentimes, as I said, begins, at teenagehood, right? Teenagers are navigating relationships from very early on. Whether somebody, has a boyfriend at school and you want to have a boyfriend too, or, vice versa, because this happens both ways. Whether you're a guy and you want to have a girlfriend, but all you know is what you've been conditioned to believe about, uh, gender formalities, right?
Mhm.
And you take that with you and you carry it into these relationships and they progress. And oftentimes I hear parents say, not my child, She
Mhm.
knows better. He
Yeah.
knows better. And unfortunately, children are away from us 8 to 9 hours of the day, and they're spending it with their peers. And again, peer pressure often seeps into their mindsets. It even sometimes overtakes what they know to be true and what they know should be bad, just to be a part of the clique, just to be assimilated, just to be seen. And so, these relationships form, and, oftentimes it's often very brutal, physical, emotional, verbal, and they hide it from parents because, again, our parents are saying to us, don't do what I do what I say. Not
Mhm.
understanding that is just not realistic. What we see, we learn. What we
Yeah.
see, it's ingrained in us.
Yes. And we kind of imitate what we've seen without really conscious and intentional work around that. And then something else you brought up that I think is so important to bring up is, right, there's this myth or this perception of what a victim looks like, but also what a perpetrator looks like. And so well-educated, financially secure, you know, seen as, very, I guess, prestigious
Charming,
in the
articulate.
community is not
Yes.
what people think of when they think of a perpetrator of domestic violence, right? If you think about like kind of what's in the media or in movies, it's like this rough, always blue collar, drinking kind of, like less
Right.
educated, less financially
Mhm.
secure man who's going to abuse.
Right.
And that's not what it looks like.
No, no. And so, yeah, definitely a myth about what perpetrators can look like. And, the most recent case, in the news, I'm not going to even glorify his name, but the
Yeah.
most recent case in the news, where his wife was, missing and then, believed to be
Yes.
murdered at this time, presented very well. And
Yes.
he almost, I could say behavior wise, prior to what you heard about him that came out in, weeks and, since then, is he presented well, just like my father, right? Charming, articulate, well spoken, the
Mhm.
guy that's not angry all the time, right? But behind closed doors, obviously, there was a different story. And I think many times we often look for the bad guy to look like a bad guy, and it just isn't the case.
Yeah.
Um, Abusers do not want to be found out. Abusers do not want to be held accountable. Abusers don't want to be associated with that thing. That thing that they do is because of what someone else made them do. That has nothing to do with who they're great at deflecting, great at passing the blame, passing
Yes.
the buck, and never being one to be held accountable. And so, when somebody, might, at the very core find out who they really are, it's a really big, not so great deal for them.
Yeah.
They want to keep covered up. They want to, at the onset, appear as well as they can be, because that's just not them, right? That's a
Yeah.
thing that happened because, they made it happen. If they didn't wear their dress that way, I wouldn't act that way. If they had, spent the money the way I told them to, this wouldn't have happened. If they had raised the children the way I wanted them to, this wouldn't have happened. If they had cleaned the house or cooked the food or did anything that I told them to do, if they had, gave into the power that I have and the control that I have, none of this wouldn't have happened. And so,
Yeah. And the
yeah,
trouble with that is so many victims are trying to do exactly as they're told, do what they need to do to stay safe, but it's a moving target.
yes,
It is a
nothing you
moving
do.
target. So you can't win.
No,
There's no winning.
no, no, no. And you sit back and you think, as a victim, you are trying to make sense of it all because you're saying to yourself, the person that I fell in love with, or the person that I fell for, the person that I met in the first week of this relationship, month, year, however long it took for the mask to fall off, wasn't this person. So you keep hanging on. You keep trying to, get to the finish line, and the goalpost keeps moving every time, right? Because it's never going to stop. The cycle keeps repeating. That level of power and control that they have, they keep trying to grow it as much as possible, right? So she let me do this. I'm gonna take I'm gonna take a mile. I'm gonna go a little further. She let me yell at her. Let me slap her. She let me slap her. Let me beat her. She let me beat her. Let me confine her. And just it keeps going, and the ante keeps rising until sometimes, unfortunately, you get to the point where you hear about these stories in the news that we just talked about that ends up tragic or fatal. And, those are just the stories that we hear about. How many do we not hear about when it comes to this issue?
Right.
But yes. It's never it's never a person that, is outwardly or even internally looking to change. They're not willing to put in the work. They're willing to put in the lip service so that they can go on to the next cycle of abuse or keep the cycle going as much as they could.
Yeah. And so what do you think, having the experience as an adult and watching your mom, what is, I guess, that breaking of, like, what for you was the moment of like, this is really hard for me to leave, but I am ready to leave?
Yeah. And for many victims, it's different. It looks different.
Mm-hmm.
And, I call it the breaking point. You've had enough. You can't take it anymore. And that for me was the last attack. It left me in a state that I had to escape in the wee hours of the morning while he slept, knowing that if he woke up, that he could start again, that I could infuriate him with just being there, and that he could potentially kill me. The level of the attack that particular night, which spanned from about 9 o'clock the night before and went till about 2 o'clock the next morning, showed me that he literally was the devil in walking form, human form.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to make a choice. And for the first time in almost 2 years in that particular relationship, I chose myself. I didn't know that I was choosing myself, but, just getting up and quietly leaving the apartment that morning and going to the emergency room was me choosing myself. And all I looked at it was just trying to survive, right?
Yeah.
I just need to survive. I just need to get a cab. I just need to get to the hospital. I just need to, figure out what's going on inside of me, because something is very wrong based on all the blows that I received. And, I don't think I even knew at that point whether or not I was completely through. I just knew that I was done for the moment, longer than I was willing to give myself a long period of time to digress from what had happened. And in giving myself that period of time, he also tried to up the ante. As we know, when victims seek to leave these relationships, it's the most dangerous time for them. Again, going back to that recent case in the news, and so during that period where, he tried to break into my apartment because I told him verbally for the first time that I was through, him then beginning to stalk me, all of these things married to the idea that I could just never go back. I just had to keep going this way, away from what I had experienced over the last 2 years, because nothing good was ever going to come of it. I can tell you that even when I was, at court, I was, finally then getting a restraining order. I even questioned myself then. Well, what if I'm doing too much? What if I overreacted to all of this? Maybe, things can just go back. I question you question yourself all throughout the journey. I don't think anything becomes clear. You don't ever really leave that fog until you leave the fog. And until then, you're just trying to muddle through and navigate. So when I hear people say, why doesn't she just leave, or why did she stay? There's so many layers to even getting to the point of leaving. And then when you do leave, there's so many other added layers that it really irks me to the core
Yeah.
to hear that question asked, because that should never be the question. The question should be, why aren't abusers held accountable? Why do abusers abuse? How do we get them help? Because they certainly do need help. As much as we
Yeah.
learned in our subconscious how to receive love or vice versa, give love, just the same, did abusers learn to perpetuate what they saw in their own homes or even in their communities. So how are we putting more attention toward that rather than trying to figure out why victims stay or why did they leave at a certain point?
Yeah. And I think it's like this very slow transition or process from like, this being like an issue just in the home. This is like an issue we don't even need to address because it's behind closed doors. It's a family issue.
It's not our business, right?
Not our business, how they live their family life. To now, really recognizing like, okay, so survivors do need help here, but there's still such a strong victim blaming stance over this. And I think some of it is lack of knowledge and education of
Awareness.
How the abuse, like how abuse works, how it happens. And I also think there's this, it is so widespread that is so scary for people, because a lot of people that are in power do subscribe to having power and control over other people.
Yeah.
And so people making those decisions and, putting these things, front, like law enforcement, there are some amazing law enforcement officers. There are also many law enforcement officers that went into law enforcement so they can have power and control over people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Or people in really high up companies or attorneys or, right, these well-educated who also grew up seeing violence or grew up with no attachment, no secure attachments, and learned the only way to get your needs met is by harming people and manipulation.
Right.
If they're partly in charge of change, there's not going to be a whole lot of change. They don't want their mask to shift so that people see.
Right. And again, for me, it comes back to the accountability factor. They don't want to be found out. They want to, as you said, hide behind their mask and continue life as they know it. But, again, it's not as many stories out there as there should be, because again, victims live in fear for their lives or their pets or their family members. And there are many horror stories of police harming their spouses, judges, lawyers, and but I don't want to put them in just in that group. There are many others, the regular Joe Schmo who does not have any power in the world, where he only knows power in his house. And he's a very, great, not great, but harmful abuser, just like the judge and the policeman and the lawyer. They all work from the same playbook, which is again what they were taught by prior abusers in their life and their spaces. So it really doesn't matter who or where they are. Abusers abuse. Victims fall prey, and it grows so much across the board. I think, however, that the whole system, legal system, needs an overhaul. I travel a lot. There's one part of the year, and so it doesn't matter where I am. DV awareness is always at the top of the plate for me. And so even if it's personal travel, I take time at least one day to visit a DV agency or some arm of the legal system that helps with this issue. And so there was one year I traveled to Brazil just before COVID in September the year before. And I visited a police station because I couldn't find any DV agency in the area that I'm going to be in. And this particular police station was dedicated to women coming to report crimes that had been done to them. So sexual assault, DV, all of that, right? And they had a more than a few women police officers that were there to receive their reports, because domestic violence had come to a head in the country after one woman was thrown off her balcony by her abuser that same particular year. What they did in hopes of addressing this issue is they trained all 600 judges on the issue of domestic violence. All 600 sitting judges on the issue of abuse. Because oftentimes people go before courts and they don't understand, the judges and those before don't understand this issue. And I just wish that across the board, now I'm not saying Brazil, Rio, which is where I was at, has this great understanding and they're doing fantastic around this issue. I'm saying the action that they took is commendable, right? There's still much more work to be done. That being said, I wish that the US could take that stance to give other countries an example of what, having the system work for us victims looks like, right? Judges, lawyers, you should be trained, you should be mandated to understand this particular issue that you deal with on a one-on-one basis. Police, some police have domestic violence liaisons or domestic violence departments. Some don't. Some entire police stations and agencies have the training over domestic violence. Some don't, right? So that you find these gaps, and big case in point, the Gabby Petito. Right. So you have where, you're sitting back from the outside looking in and you're saying, oh my God, how could you not know this was domestic violence and not understand that this guy was the perpetrator, versus then trying to figure why wasn't anybody called, right? So you look at all of these things and try to figure out, like, why aren't we taking a bigger stance around this? Why don't we understand that this is an epidemic and that it's everyone's business? I don't know what the answer to that is. And so that's why I formed Love Life Now, is to just do the little part that I could do in my corner of the world, and be part of that, a small part of that change. As well as many other people doing the work.
And I think that's, where we've all come together, those of us that are doing this work. We are, a couple drops in the bucket, but when all of us are working together, there's so many more drops in that bucket's going to fill up and
absolutely get full. And even if it's emptied out, right, even if we're all spread apart and doing the work, it creates a ripple effect. That water, that drop creates a ripple effect. So you've helped this person, or you've sent them to me to help with, maybe financial assistance or whatever, and that creates a ripple effect in this person's journey. And that's what I believe that it's about when it comes down to doing the boots on the ground work, is to be able to create ripple effects in people's lives. I didn't have a ripple effect. I think I'll take that back. I did have a ripple effect from the very going into the ER to then being cautioned to file a restraining order, something that I would have never have thought of doing for many different reasons. And I ended up doing. Brought me to this point. So there wasn't any one thing that I could say that got me out. It was all of these different pieces that led me to sort of being where I am today. And I'm so grateful. And again, that's what I believe really helps folks in their journeys of getting to safety. I don't know if it's, healing. I don't love that word. I think we continue to heal. Because to this day, I still suffer from PTSD. I am scared of my own shadow. My daughter, my husband, and our son, they all look at me like I have 10 heads every time I jump, right? Because it's like, Mommy, we're in the house, who's here. But the idea of something or someone always seemingly coming to harm me is still there. And, we live with these, with these things that follow us through these relationships, PTSD, and we sort of get tools to manage them, which is why I applaud
Yep.
the work that you do as a therapist. I still have a therapist to this day. I got back into therapy, after writing the book, because there were so many details that came up for me that it was
Yeah.
really, there was no way that I was going to finish it without sort of talking to someone. And I still have her today because, it's self-care for me, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's really, really helpful for people to hear that you can be feeling freedom, feeling joy, really living your life how you want to live it based on your values. And you still have some triggers and you still have challenges, because I think a lot of the people that I work with feel that that is like an indicator that they're not going to be okay,
right.
or that they're never going to heal from this. But that you can live a really wonderful life.
Yes.
Even when you have some hypervigilance at times, or something comes up and you didn't know it was going to, but it triggered you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You can thrive at life, even though these things still exist. And again, really grateful for the opportunity to be able to, because I know there are a lot of people that are struggling still because they haven't gotten to that next leg yet. They're bound by what the experiences did to them. And it's taking a little bit longer. And that's why I say, it's a continuous healing journey, because there's no time frame. There's no time limit on what that looks like. And there's no one set of things that works for any one person. And, for me, my faith, I really lean a lot on my faith, my family, self-care in general. And again, that part of that is therapy once a week for 1 hour. I look forward to being able to just vent or just talk about anything that's on my mind that I don't necessarily or feel I can, necessarily curate with, my husband, who, many people believe that when you're in a happy, loving relationship, that that's where it's at. Like, I have to get married and then I'll be happy, or I have to have a child and then I'll be happy. Not understanding that all of that comes from within. What brings you joy? What makes you tick? As an individual, what makes you feel good? And I think because happiness is fleeting, right?
Yes.
Your husband can make you happy today because he bought you something or he did something nice for you. But he also is an individual with individual things that makes him happy. It just is the same thing for you. And I think if we lean into that more, lean into what, does it for us, I think the more content days that we'll have, versus, feeling bad or downtrodden, or, there's a lack of self-esteem. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, Sybil. And again, I don't take it for granted that I'm in the space that I'm in, which is a good space. And there are bad days. I just had a nightmare maybe 2 nights ago. And I called my mom, who was in Trinidad, and, had to talk it out with her. Because there are days like that. There are days where you take on so much that it transfers into your subconscious, and you have nightmares, or you're extra hyper vigilant, or things just don't go so well. But by the time the clock strikes 5 and you close the doors, so I just I urge people to just keep filling their lives with things that make them feel good, whatever
And
that looks like.
Knowing that those moments, they don't last forever.
They don't.
Right? Those tough moments, they don't last forever. And as you go through this, and if you're working towards things, right? If you're avoiding completely, that is not going to be helpful at all. But if you're kind of working through this over time, these triggers will get fewer and farther between. They will be less intense. You'll have the skills to manage it when it pops up. And so, having that trust and belief in yourself that you you can weather, right? Like think about, you weathered that storm. You
Mm,
survived the storm of your abusive relationship. And for those of my listeners who have to deal with so much post-separation abuse, you survived that. You can survive a trigger when it pops up here and there. You, believe me, you can do this. And so just having that trust that you have it within you to do what you need.
yeah, for sure. I think, you know, at the very core of this issue is staying silent. And to be able to work through any of this, it begins with speaking up, whether that means, you know, talking to a family member, getting a support system, um, you know, trusting an outside source to be able to help you safety plan. You know, it all begins with you saying something. And even when, as you mentioned, you know, you get to the other side, you've gotten all the help and the resources, and you've made it, and you're surviving. It takes more work to be able to continue to talk things out and understand that you're not alone when it comes to, you know, PTSD or your triggers or whatever it is that still plagues you, even as you've exited this abusive storm. To be able to talk things out with someone, anyone, to hold it in, that's probably one of the worst things that we can do in the
Yeah.
relationship and even after.
Yep.
To be able to muddle through it. And again, maybe that's not verbal. Maybe it's writing in a journal. Maybe it's just, you know, but just releasing what, you know, is happening inside of you is really important. Mental health is important. I don't know, I'm talking to the choir, but it
Yeah.
is super important to be able to release, because it's not your burden to carry. What was done to you was not your fault. You didn't do this to yourself, and they need to take the accountability, and it needs to lie there. Give it back to who it
Yeah.
belongs to. So yeah.
Yeah. And so with that, I definitely want to just mention and bring up The Legacy He Left Me, because I read it year and a half, 2 years ago already.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh,
yeah.
it
It came
seems
out
like
in June of
it's
2021. It's
been a
crazy.
really long time.
Yeah.
But there's that process of healing throughout that, right? Writing your story, and kind of some of the method of therapy I use. It's a narrative based practice to where people are sharing their stories and they get to reauthor parts of their story. And
Yeah.
so I really saw that in your book of like just watching you go through the process and reauthor your story in your life
Yes. Yeah.
through, I got to read it in your memoir. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I guess that my guess is that that process of writing was probably hard and also immensely healing.
Yes. Yes. It was both. And you know, being able to tell it on my terms, to be able to share, you know, what I thought were details I had dealt with, but hadn't. And then to be able to navigate that after writing the book was absolutely healing. It was immensely cathartic. And, you know, there's a saying that says, um, I think it goes, speak your truth, even if your voice shakes.
Mm-hmm.
And I may be saying it not as correctly as it should be, but, you know, in writing the book, my voice shook hard. I
Yeah.
remember writing certain parts and having to stop in the moment because, you know, I wanted to, you know, voice it to my husband. And then in voicing it to him, I couldn't even get past the first line. It
Yeah.
it completely broke me down. Um, and he would have to, you know, comfort me and, you know, but, you know, I did it anyway. I did it
Yeah.
anyway, and I got through it. And, you know, now to be able to be on this nationwide book tour, sharing this story with women and men. I'm meeting a lot of men on this journey who are coming forward and saying either me too, my mother, my sister, my niece, a family member, a colleague, and, just trying to, understand ways that they could be either of help to themselves or assistance and a support to someone else. And that to me, obviously amidst other women sharing their stories on this journey in the same way, is beyond anything I could have ever asked for. This is really a continued blessing. The book has been adopted by a local hospital here. They now use it as mandated reading for their social workers that are, doing the frontline work. Schools have it in their libraries. Universities also, some have it in their libraries. There's just no way that I could have thought that, my voice shaking as I wrote this would have led to this. And I'm grateful to God. I'm grateful to my publisher who approached me to write it. And I'm grateful that I felt like the time was right. I just couldn't have imagined this. So again, tell your story even when your voice shakes.
Yep. And that those ripples, each of those people who are affected by it, and, more people are affected by it than we even know.
Yes.
Right. And so how extraordinary that is. And even if it is just knowing that they're not alone, or I really try and make sure I'm, interviewing and talking with people that don't look the same, that aren't from the same place, because if I'm maybe telling a story over and over, some people will really subscribe to because they are like me. But there are so many that are not like me that may be like, that doesn't quite fit. So it is just so amazing, the reach, and that, you can affect so many different people in that way, and finding someone that like looks like you, that has a story like yours, can be that catalyst. Like we were talking about, like what was the thing? And so often when I'm working with clients or members of my community, there was something that they it sparked, like, oh my gosh, I see my story in their story.
This resonates. Yes.
And now I can do something because I understand. And so I think that your book is just allows that for so many people, is that they're going to be able to see themselves in your story. And so, I'm so excited about it. We have it in my office. One of my interns currently has it right now, reading it, because I require all my people to get really well informed and understand it. And so, I just am so grateful that you and I were able to connect, and
very same here,
be our little drops in the bucket.
Yes.
Across the nation, because we don't live near. So if people want to find you, they're interested in the Love Life Now Foundation, they're interested in your book, how do they learn about you?
Thank you for that. And thank you for sharing that about your intern. That is what makes the work so worthwhile and valuable. And so to find us, we promote year-round awareness around the issue of domestic violence at Love Life Now Foundation. And we do that by hosting initiatives in the community, but we also have a direct resource called the Get Safe Fund. So if someone has recently left abuse, 2 weeks, no more than a month, or thinking about leaving and needs help with a domestic violence related expense, we can help with a small mini grant to help you move on to your next leg of your journey to getting safe. And folks can find that resource and more about us on our website at lovelifenow.org. Again, lovelifenow.org, or calling or texting us at 888-556-9876. Again, 888-556-9876. And they can call or text that number because
we're going to
people's are ready to talk verbally.
Yeah, we'll have all of that information in the show notes for sure. And
Yeah.
then where can they find the legacy he left me?
Yeah, so it is at thelegacyheleftme.com, just as it reads, thelegacyheleftme.com. You can go right on there, learn more about the book, and purchase it if you so please. Hope
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, well, thank you again so much. I always love our conversations. We can talk for days, ladies and
Yes.
gentlemen. We can talk for days about this. But we're going to wrap up today. And if you feel like this could be helpful to somebody in your life, if you wouldn't mind sharing, I think they would appreciate it, and we appreciate it here. The more impact we can have, the better. So thank you, Lovern, again for being here, and we will catch you on the next episode of the Rising Beyond podcast.
Thank you for having me.